What's up, interpreters? I'm Brandi Stewart. I am the Space Science Coordinator with NASA's Earth to Sky, where we connect NASA science to interpreters and informal educators across the country and around the globe.
What is up, interpreters? I am NAI's Executive Director and space fan, Paul Caputo.
What's up, interpreters? This is Heather Minier, your Corporate Engagement and Partnerships Manager with NAI. And I am geeking out a lot lately on not only the mission, but the crew. So, Brandi, thank you so much for being here. I'm hoping you will just kind of explain, first of all, your role as Space Science Coordinator, but then the the role that Earth to Sky plays with NASA and how that partnership works.
Yeah, so I am the Space Science Coordinator, and some of my friends joke with me about being the Space Science Coordinator. But in essence, what I do with Earth to Sky is I coordinate and serve as a liaison basically between NASA projects specifically around space science and interpreters and informal educators. And Earth to Sky focuses on place-based interpretation in informal education, which kind of sets itself apart from maybe some other programs within NASA. We are really focused on helping interpreters take NASA data and make it real for their visitors in place.
Obviously, there's been an increased interest in the space program. I think it captivated all of us in the news. And so I think your role as an educator, as an interpreter, was probably heightened during that period. For you, using interpretation to convey that science, where's the line for you in terms of there's a lot of amazing science here happening. That's not necessarily where the most important interpretive themes are. The most important interpretive themes are, gosh, we got so far away from the Earth, and we were we went around the moon, farthest humans ever been from the Earth. So where's the line for you between that? Everything we just did was so cool, and here's all this incredible science.
For the Artemis mission, Artemis II, I didn't really know what to expect prior to the mission. I had sent out some resources to our Earth to Sky community on how to integrate some of the things that NASA put together. And one of the resources that NASA put together was who would be on your moon crew. And I really feel like now that we're through the mission after 10 days and past, that it's really the moon crew that is, excuse the pun, that is stellar. I think that's really what people connected with is yes, we went furthest from Earth than any other humans ever have. But it's about those humans that were in the Orion capsule that I think really drew in so many people that maybe never have been interested in space science before. And I really see it as a shift. And I just really have to commend NASA communications for really amplifying that human part of the story. I think there's a stereotype of NASA being so data driven and so focused on the science and the numbers and the math. But I really saw poetry, art, personal connection, appreciation of each other throughout the Artemis mission, that I think that is really what drew people in. And whenever I think about that for interpretation, I mean, that is interpretation. It is making something that could be very fact heavy and technical milestone driven and making it relatable to people in their everyday life. I mean, a very small percentage of us have ever gone into a capsule. and gone around the moon. But I feel like everybody had that experience with the four astronauts that were in Orion and were able to relate to them as like regular humans.
Yeah, I agree with you that the human connection was amazing, and the crew talked about that too. I think that was part of it, right? They really put that front and center. What does your role look like before a mission like this as the space science coordinator? What does your job look like kind of before, during, and after a mission like this? Like, are you preparing? You're obviously in contact with other folks at NASA, but what does that look like for you?
What it really looks like for me is because of my background in interpretation and environmental education, it's sorting through the resources that are available and highlighting the ones that are best for place based interpretation. And like in our course over the summer, we were in Minnesota and it was focused on the moon. And we invited a local solar system ambassador to talk about the Artemis mission. So that helps also create this like community of somebody local that these parks and museums and places can then call on to do a presentation at their own site. And then we also had scientists like Dr. Prabal Saxena talk about astrobiology and going to the moon and some concerns with human contamination on the lunar surface that also parallel leave no trace. And so it's really my job is making those direct connections instead of throwing everything that NASA has at interpreters, really curating the resources and highlighting what makes the most sense for their audience because NASA does also a lot of K through 12 resources and some of those just like wouldn't make sense in a place-based setting.
I think that, in interpretation, nature interpreters, well, nature and cultural interpreters have access to that resource, right? Like if you're doing an in-person live interpretive presentation, you very often have something that you can hold, point to, see with your own eyes. Night sky interpretation is obviously different from that. You're interpreting things that are often light years away, or even in the case of the moon, something that is part of everyone's lives, but not accessible in a real way. How do you make those, I'll use the word resources, how do you make the night sky and the moon accessible and real through interpretation?
I think the first thing that we really talk about is relating the scale to our lives.
Hmm.
I don't think that the general public understands just how big space is. And so, one of the early techniques that I learned was if the solar system is the size of a quarter, our galaxy would be the size of the United States. And I think that really brings home some of the scale of our solar system and the role in our galaxy. But what I like to use the most is tangible 3D printed tactile models. And NASA has a large number of 3D print files that are free that you can go to your local library if they have a makerspace and have them printed. And it can be things like constellations. You can feel a nebula. And so these are things that are useful for people who have low vision or who are blind, but they're also really useful for everyone. I am a person who thinks spatially. And so having something that I can hold on to is really helpful to understand the magnitude of space or like what exactly does a nebula feel like or like what shape is it really instead of this two-dimensional picture like you might see with a Hubble telescope photo. Like pairing those two things, like a Hubble telescope photo and a tactile model, I think are really powerful. And during the mission, as many who are listening probably know, it was live streamed almost the entire time. And so I had it playing in the background while I was doing other things. But during the lunar flyby, I was glued to their descriptions. And at one point, Christina Cook, during a situational report or a sit rep, on the day of the lunar flyby, said something that stuck with me so much that I captured it. And she said, the truth is, the moon really is its unique body in the universe. It's not just a poster in the sky that goes by, it is a real place. And that really stuck with me because I really think that I was looking at the moon as like a poster going through the sky, but I do have a 3D model of the moon. Like, thinking about it in that way really changed for me my own connection with the moon. And then I don't have a science background, and working for the National Park Service and working in some pretty magical places really exposed to me a thing called a planetary analog. And that is a place on Earth that is really like places in our solar system. And we can use places here on Earth to better understand places in our solar system and also look for evidence of life within our solar system. So to do another quote from the lunar flyby, because I again just loved the poetic nature of the astronauts' descriptions of the moon. When Reed Wiseman, who is the commander, he was describing some of the trenches in the moon, and he compared it to the way that rain comes down in Grand Canyon and fingers off into the desert. And I can just close my eyes and envision exactly what he's talking about. And granted, I live here at the Grand Canyon, but you can envision what he's talking about. And I will never see those trenches in real life on the moon, but I have a direct connection to his language. And if he would have used really scientific language, I wouldn't have that connection. So, having all of these analogies, there were so many analogies that the astronauts were using. And it really reminded me of just how many places, not only in this country, but around the world, that resemble other places in our solar system that NASA scientists use to study. And many of the places that interpreters tell stories about are those planetary analogs.
I think Heather will agree with me here. One of my favorite things that Christina Cook said, it was really two. It was go birds and fly eagles fly. Uh, so,
I'm from Pittsburgh, so
oh,
That doesn't work.
Christina Cook brought confetti from the Eagles Super Bowl parade into outer space with her. I thought that was pretty great.
Brandi, will you talk a little bit? Because I feel like you mentioned it, and now we're talking more about places and the place-based interpretation that you've talked about a few times. Will you just explain that to the audience?
yeah, there are a lot of programs in NASA that work with museum educators. And how Earth to Sky sets itself apart is like we really focus on place based education or interpretation. So it's the stories that make sense only in place, where you can facilitate an experience that is exceptionally amplified by the fact that you're not like sitting in an auditorium. In fact, you're standing in a sand dune, a sand field. And so it's stories that are directly connected to place that almost wouldn't make sense outside of that place. They're joined together.
And then, I mean, that's why it's important, like what you were saying earlier, right, about those tangibles and tactile things that you can do because obviously, like you're saying, we've not been to the moon, but you're still having to communicate kind of, things about that. And so do you have any like, well, I guess you've already talked a little bit about the tips and tricks to bringing places alive where you can't be. You know what I mean? Creating relevance at places where most of us will never get to, like this. And I know, I mean, part of, like you were saying earlier, like what did this was that crew. Somehow that crew just brought to life their mission more than any I could really remember as far as like somebody talking about a place I've never been to, and so far away. And they really did somehow make you care about it.
Yeah, I think that I would encourage interpreters to look at their own strengths and to look at their site because I am sure that there is some sort of connection between space exploration or space science or lunar landings. In fact, we are facilitating a training with Voyagers next month. And, I was looking at Voyager's interpretive themes, and it has some of the oldest rocks in North America. And then that led me to looking at the geologic timeline of the moon. And the moon doesn't have the erosive properties like wind and flowing water the way that Earth does. So on Earth, it's really rare to have these old rocks still preserved and also exposed. And then the moon serves almost as this library of histories of our solar system because it's able to capture really large events like the Great Bombardment, and we can still see those to this day. So I really feel like are connections to make, even if you walk out of your office and into your site and you're like, I have no idea how this would connect with space. I think that there is some sort of connection when you dig down because Earth has a lot of similarities with so many other planetary bodies within our solar system. But not only that, I think that the Artemis mission really showed us a lot of characteristics of leadership that could also be really relevant to historical parks and those places that are telling stories about leaders. So I feel like there's something for every site. And if folks are having kind of brainstorming blocks on that, that is kind of my role is feel free to reach out to me and I can help you make those connections. Like after I sent out my resources for Artemis, a site reached out to me of, oh, how could we connect this to oceans? And I sent them a bunch of resources about how they could connect it to oceans. So that's kind of my role is helping interpreters connect space science to their site.
Well, you've sort of touched on something else that I wanted to ask you about, which is, you conduct trainings for interpreters around the country, and I'm curious to know, within the time frame of your career, has the way that we interpret space or the way that you conduct trainings on interpreting space, has that changed, or are there changes happening now?
As a former supervisor of interpreters and having trained a lot of interpreters on space science and night sky interpretation, I really feel like there is this pervasive myth in our field that you have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the night sky and know how to perfectly use a telescope, which is almost impossible, before you can get into night sky interpretation. And that just isn't the case. That might have been kind of the trend of several decades ago, but really, the public, especially in recent years, the public is really hungry for anything night sky and space science related. I think a lot of the sites that host festivals or night sky programming, they're seeing that in their numbers, is that large amount of visitors and audience members are showing up to those night sky programs. And maybe that's connected to like the wonder of the final frontier of space, but it doesn't have to be something that is intimidating. And my perspective on night sky training is that I just want interpreters to feel more confident to use what they know with the night sky, because a lot of the public, like, they don't even have access to dark night skies. And so sharing just basic connections and ways of observing and exploring the night sky, I think is really valuable for the public. And so I would encourage interpreters everywhere to not feel intimidated by a night sky interpretation, and to just jump in and try it.
What do your trainings look like, Brandi? And how do people get into your trainings? Where are they held?
So we have done 2 space science trainings so far. My position is relatively new. It came after the eclipse coordinator position. And we chose Lake Mead, and that's near Las Vegas, and then Minneapolis, St. Paul, through Mississippi River National Recreation Area and the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge. What I really liked about these 2 trainings is that they were near urban areas, and that kind of had multiple benefits. One, it made night sky training a little bit more accessible for interpreters who might not be able to travel, but they live in a city. They can come to during the day and go back to where they live at night. But it also, I think, reminded everybody that the night sky doesn't just exist in the darkest of skies. Like, I live here at Grand Canyon. We have very, very dark skies. I take them for granted, but night skies are everywhere. And so by being in cities, it allows us to illustrate how to still do night sky programming. And also, I think that's where NASA resources really shine, because um, I don't mean to be downplaying on dark night skies, but they kind of take the show, and then anything the interpreter says just has to be about the stars above. But by having a more relatable night sky to what most people see, it allows interpreters to use some of those NASA resources to talk about space science and night skies beyond, oh, what constellation is that? Or this is the Milky Way.
So, okay, we have a few minutes left here, Brandy, and so I wanted to ask maybe a couple of lighter questions for you. Uh, you're down here on the surface of the Earth interpreting the moon. We just had this fantastic Artemis II mission around the moon. If you could go to the moon, first of all, would you? And second of all, what role would you want to play?
I would not be a very useful astronaut. I, I get motion sick really easily. So by the time I got into space and wasn't feeling gravity anymore, I would still need a few days to recover. Um, but following the Artemis II mission kind of exposed me to some really cool roles that I think that I would like. There are astronaut trainers who get to travel with the astronauts to planetary analogs across the world and help them better understand the geology and the landscape of the moon. So they'll travel to places like Iceland in order to help astronauts better understand lunar geology. But I think I'm going to go with the role that I learned about very early in the mission. During their first full day in space, I was just listening to the live stream, and the astronauts were looking for wraps and straps to tie down something, so like Velcro. And so they called down to mission control and they asked where it's stored. And that's when I found out that everything is inventoried, like down to a pouch within a bag within a storage locker. And so they were able to tell the astronauts exactly where things are, which is probably really useful because you don't, as an astronaut in a very small space, don't want to be yard sailing everything that you have in the capsule and letting it float around in order to find one thing. So I love organization and I also love spreadsheets. So I think that the job of organizing and packing and tracking the inventory would something that would be right up my alley. But I would also want to stipulate that I get to put everything within the capsule as well, because I'd want to be in the capsule, but I just want to be in the capsule while it's still on Earth.
That spreadsheet. I want to see that spreadsheet.
Me too.
I want to know if they contract that service out. Like, can I hire them to do that for my life right now? To
Yeah, and it's kind of like, again, what made the live stream just made the astronauts so relatable, because then they had to call down and say, oh, we're moving these things from this spot to this other spot so that the capsule communication could transfer that information to the person who manages all of that stuff so that they could update their spreadsheet. And it's like those mundane things are also what we got to experience during those 10 days.
Yeah, the relatability that they created was just amazing. Like I just they really I feel like a lot of times with astronauts, that type of career is very hard for me to ever imagine, but the humanity that they brought to it definitely helped sort of be like, oh, they're humans that just went to
Mhm.
space. The Brandi, I honestly too, as long as Earth to Sky has been involved with NAI, they've focused a lot on Earth science, but they've been connecting NASA science with interpreters for 20 years. And most people think, when they think of NASA, they obviously think of space, but Earth to Sky's work has involved Earth science for a long time. So, why is it a priority for NASA to share Earth science initiatives and space science initiatives too with park interpreters?
Yeah, I think that because the Apollo missions were so long ago, that we have an opportunity now to connect new generations with the concept of the pale blue dot. And I really think that the images that came out during the lunar flyby of a crescent Earth rising above the moon really harkens back to the Apollo 8 image of Earthrise that was taken by Bill Anders and really had a huge role in spurring the environmental movement and Earth Day, because it finally gave us a image of Earth as our home. It's all that we have, and it supports all life. And the astronauts really, I think, drove this home during their lunar flyby and throughout the mission, and would also joke about it, of saying, oh, you guys look great there on Earth. And so connecting that to also interpretation in NAI is NASA has all of this global data but it's really the interpreters that are really valuable boots on the ground communicators of making this global data local and make it really relevant to the places that they're in and provide some context that is beyond kind of the big picture and really narrowing it down and helping people relate to it on that level.
Well, Brandi, this has been such an interesting conversation and so appreciated. I mean, it's such an interesting challenge to interpret outer space, right? And as you just were commenting, to relate that to Earth science here on Earth. So such a fascinating topic and such important work that you all are doing. We so appreciate Earth to Sky's support of NAI, and we so appreciate the relationship that our two organizations have had over the years. Where can folks go to find out more about Earth to Sky and the work that you all are doing?
The best way to connect with us is at earthtosky.org. You can register for a free account. It doesn't automatically get approved. We do screen through people who register, so we make sure that we are protecting our community of practice and it's centered around interpreter voices and informal educator voices. And after registering and getting approved, you'll then have access to almost 20 years of training and resources, videos. We just did a webinar on using Earth to Sky videos in seasonal interpretation training for the summer. And you can also reach out to me at Brandi, Brandi, .l.stewart@nasa.gov. And my email is also available on the Earth to Sky website. And again, I just want to emphasize that my role is to help interpreters connect NASA science to their site. So please do not hesitate to reach out. That's my job.
And just if you want to hear more about it, we will have an interp talk coming up in about a month. I'm sorry, I cannot remember the date right now. Actually, it might be May 6th. So keep an eye out. NAI members will get information about that, but you can also find information on our website.
And interpreters, that's what's up.
That's what's up.